We're laying people off right before Christmas. That is not fun. Enron was our largest client.
The biggest case of corporate fraud in history.
This was supposed to be a very solid company.
It is really the most stunning example of corporate misbehavior.
They filed for bankruptcy, and instantly, over a third of our business was gone. The decision that you face if you don't take quick action is your entire business collapses as well.
How many people were that were impacted?
It had to be close to 40% of our employees, so this wasn't a small number.
And what was your reaction?
I was physically ill because of the anxiety. It's never as little as you think it was. So we restructured deeper than we thought we needed to. Maintaining confidence and keeping the team together becomes very important because that's the only way you get through it. One of the less desirable things of being in a role that I am is...
Curtis, you are currently the CEO and founder of Improving. What is Improving?
So Improving is a modern digital services company. In layman's terms, we build software for our clients, or we help our clients build software. We're a pure services play. We don't own the IP. We really help other organizations build some of their greatest IP.
Right on. And how long has Improving been around?
We founded early under a different name, under the name Blue Ocean Group in 2006, but we quickly joined with a company that was a training organization in 2007. Their name was Improving, and that's where we got the name. So late 2006, early 2007 was our formation year.
Love that. And Curtis, one of the things we like to do on this show is really dive into the hard problems of business and the challenges that people face. And I wanted to dive into a formative experience we were talking about sort of before we started rolling today that you had in business. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your kind of one of your biggest business challenges?
Yeah, that one of the biggest challenges that we faced prior to Improving was that former company. That company was Valtech, and I was running the North American arm of that business. It's publicly traded on the Nouveau Marché, and as part of that, Enron was our largest client, and it was more than a third of our business at the time in the United States. So this is a pretty big client of ours. We were within 5 different subsidiaries, and the thought on our mind was that we were diversified, that it would take literally the very top of the company failing for us to be at any significant risk. However, that actually happened. So in December of that year, they filed for bankruptcy, and instantly, right before Christmas, over a third of our business was gone. We had not been paid for our services for about 4 months, and we kind of got the notice that we wouldn't be paid for that, yet we still owed a lot of our suppliers money, and we had no more revenue coming in for about a third of our business. And it really took us to the brink as a company.
Tell me about the moment you found out that Enron was going under. Where were you? How did you learn that was happening, and what was your reaction?
Well, I was actually in my house, and when I found out, it was the night before. So as you can imagine, not a lot of sleep happening. We hadn't been officially notified. In my head, I'm saying maybe I got bad information, but by the next morning, news is out. Even before we were notified officially by the company, our contract ceased immediately. And as a services company, that's your lifeblood. And then really the hardship began. And again, as I mentioned, this was right before Christmas. And the decision that you face if you don't take quick action is your entire business collapses as well, as many businesses around Enron did. And you no longer have a viable business yourself. So we had to jump into action very quickly.
So as the sun's rising that next day, what's Curtis doing?
I'm getting sick to my stomach, to be quite honest. For about 5-6 weeks, it was a regular thing where I was physically ill because of the anxiety. It's not something that you go through a lot, but it kind of continues to build your character and your experience throughout of it. Because a lot of people may not understand this, but we had to lay off people. And we're laying people off right before Christmas. That is not fun. I can also remember the founders of our organization coming together, dropping salaries, including myself, and to the point where I wasn't even going to be paying myself for a long period because every dollar counted in that moment. And that was probably the hardest thing about this, I think, was the people. We're best place to work, supposedly. And a lot of people are like, how can best places to work let people go? Well, this is a circumstance where if we didn't, we couldn't actually operate in a way that would allow us to continue to get money from the bank and things like that and keep the jobs that we did. So I can't remember if I actually did every single layoff or if I did the vast majority, but I do know the vast majority, if not all of them, as sort of a punishment to myself. I actually delivered the news to these people for most of them.
And how many people were that were impacted?
I don't remember exactly the number, but I can tell you at the time it had to be close to 40% of our employees. So this wasn't a small number.
Wow. So in retrospect, you felt like you had this very stable position. You thought, the only way we're in danger is if Enron fails, right? And then Enron does actually end up failing. In retrospect, going forward, how did that change your leadership, the way you think about strategy, the way you think about growth?
Well, it changed us in so many ways. It really did. And I'm going to say the first is this was the first time I had ever done layoffs. And it became something that I never wanted to ever have to do again. And how do you prepare yourself so that you never enter that situation? I can say that was true, except through our restructuring that our own company today had to do in 2023. So late or mid 2023. Not exactly the same situation, but something similar. So we made it 22 years again without ever having to do a significant layoff. And I think that's important because an organization like Improving's, where the business is people, they're not just numbers. These are families and they're people, and they have feelings and they have fears. And so avoiding that at all costs is very important. And I think we avoided it several times, but between the Great Recession and other events in our history. The other big event, I think, came with our financing, and learned a few quick lessons for entrepreneurs is you never can go get money when you need it. Okay, you can only get money when you don't need it. And huge lesson, because there are a lot of people that don't want to pay the interests or things like that to get up, or the finance fees to have a larger line of credit. We don't need it. Why would we ever get it? For events like this, you go get the money, you go get your financing when you absolutely don't need it, so that you can make it through some of the more difficult times when you do. Secondly, we were with a bank at that time. And I know there's been some bad rap around this bank in recent years, the Silicon Valley Bank. But to us, they were a phenomenal partner. I remember going to them, explaining the situation. I explained that we had done everything we can, right, in restructuring our business, but we still weren't going to be able to pay all of our bills in the short term. And we had other suppliers that were reliant on us. We had some subcontractors. Their businesses would go under if we couldn't pay them. And we had even places where we had living expenses that we'd been paying with longer term contracts that, and I invited them into the room, pretty much all of our financial stakeholders. And the conversation went along the lines of, you can file bankruptcy on the company and everybody loses. Everybody's going to lose in that situation, or you can give us a chance. The leadership team have reduced their salaries down to a point where it covered just benefit costs alone. Many of our employees are pitching in. We've restructured. And what I can tell you is the bank did not apply the pressure because they had seen that they could have, we were out of covenants almost instantly, so they could have done this. And Silicon Valley Bank did not. Instead, they gave us a chance to rectify things in the short term. We had to do some in the short term and some in the long term. And a couple years later, we paid back every dollar we owed. They accepted some reduction in some of the interest payments because we couldn't afford them at the time as well. Yet every supplier got paid, even though we did not get paid from Enron, and the banks got paid eventually. Huge lesson of having a good relationship with your bank, choosing your bank carefully. And when we chose to start improving back at Blue Ocean Group at the time, they actually, because of that event, gave us an unsecured line of credit to start the business, knowing that we were going to get them their money back with or without that secured line of credit. And so I'm quite proud of that moment and the things we learned and pulled through that time.
So tell me about how you navigate that conversation. You're bringing in everyone you owe money. You're bringing all your financial stakeholders, and you're saying, "Look, guys, we don't have the money." Like, how do you frame that conversation up? I imagine that personally, there's a lot of pressure being applied to you, Curtis, and a lot of them saying, how could you let this happen? I imagine in that moment, that's a tough conversation to have. So tell me, how did that conversation go, and how did you handle it?
From what I remember, because we are talking 2 decades, and hopefully I'm not exaggerating in any way, but I do remember a few things. One is we didn't have to answer the question, how did you let this happen? It was clear that this was an event that happened in the world that affected a lot of organizations. Entire companies came down even around it. I think Arthur Andersen and others, eventually with their similar accounting practices. So I didn't have to deal with that. But what I had to quickly demonstrate by the time I met is that the business was restructured in a way that if moving forward with our current business and additional slide, I had gotten that advice from some YPO friends, a presence organization I'm part of, but that it's never as little as you think it was. So we restructured deeper than we thought we needed to. This was the first time I had ever done this. And it turns out that the bank had enough confidence that they were better off effectively giving us the chance than simply taking whatever little resources they could have gotten from the company. So I went in prepared. And this was all done within 2 weeks. And they had enough confidence to say, let's take a chance in this executive team. A lot of founders are too reluctant to make hard decisions that they have to when survival is truly at stake, or they deny that survival is at stake. And that's what we were in. We were in a survival situation.
Now, you mentioned that had, pretty drastic ramifications for you personally, for your health. You mentioned, being physically ill every day. Did that, did you have a family at the time? What kind of impact did that have on your home life?
As you can imagine, I have 2 kids, and I have a wife at the time, and it's kind of difficult when you're having to, in a difficult time, really spend a tremendous amount of time focus on work. And it's not that we're putting our our family as a lower priority, quite the opposite. But we're putting a group of families at this point as a high priority together, of which we are just one of a larger group of families. And one of the less desirable things of being in a role that I am is that I do view, and I think there are a lot of CEOs that view that they're the stewards of the business, not only for their own family, but for this bigger group.
Now, for listeners, I assume most of our listeners are going to be familiar with Enron and with the situation there. But just, could you refresh people's memories? Give us a kind of the short story of Enron's collapse and what led to that.
As I understand it, and I probably am biased in this because it forever changed the way we operate, but they had some very questionable accounting practices, of which they would be double counting revenues and earnings because of their subsidiary organizations. And without oversimplifying it to that, these accounting processes actually got them so into trouble, and with not only the public markets, but with their banks, that there was no chance of recovering. And as a result, they fully collapsed with all of their subsidiaries, and they brought down a number of companies that were similar. Their accounting firm that was with them, Arthur Andersen, other companies like WorldCom, I believe, was caught up in this mix, if I remember properly. But that was at the center, and it tended to be just horrible for everybody, horrible for the executives that were there. Not everybody is making the bad decisions, so it's hard to vilify the entire executive group. But as you can imagine, the pressure, I think one of the executives actually killed themselves and left family. And it's a tragic event and something that I think could have been avoidable if there wasn't so much pressure to turn profit all the time and maximize profits. And I think that some executives fall trap too.
That makes sense. So tell me, it takes you a few years, you pay off, all of these balances that you owe, with interest in some cases reduced. How does the company go forward from there?
Well, it took a long time to recover, right? Their wounds, friends are let go, people, there's nobody that I didn't know at the company in some way. So you're recovering psychologically while you're trying to get through a hard business professional. You have doubts in yourself and there are other people. I would have to say the current environment for our industry is similar to these dot-com days right now. You hear the tech industry, I think it was in January of last year, the record tech layoffs, and the whole year has been difficult. And this is a prolonged downturn for kind of this technology horizontal in our industry. Now, are there still jobs? Of course there are, and the best people are finding those. But even some really good people are still struggling today. And that's hard to navigate through. So back then, maintaining good attitudes, maintaining confidence, and keeping the team together becomes very important because that's the only way you get through it.
So how have the lessons from that helped you to navigate now in your current business the tech downturn that you're talking about here? Has that changed the way that you think you've approached the market today?
Well, there's so many lessons really to be learned by this. Even the simplest contracts. We had built Enron Online and built a huge portion of that, never got paid for it. So contracts today, we didn't want the IP, but they ended up selling that IP for 4 or 5 times what they owed us for it. And we never got to see a dime. So contracts now say, hey, you pay us, we don't own the IP. Until you pay us, we own the IP. And so it's very simple things like that are more mature in running the business. But I'm going to take our executive team, many of which were there at that company at the time and now, in these hard environments that require resilience, people sticking with it, people keeping their heads up. And I would be encouraged to anybody that's had a difficult last 12 to 18 months, the sun is rising. It really is. The sun isn't shining above the horizon, but it is like when it's been a good night or a long night, and you can kind of see the light above. We are getting those. A lot of colleagues in our industry are. And I think that in the next 6 to 9 months, as long as we don't see some huge dip, we're going to see positive outcomes here. But the whole philosophy of how we built our business was born in the previous business, and one around conscious capitalism, and one where we believe in that business is a force of good in this world, right? Now, alone business is a force of good because it provides its voluntary exchange of things that are adding value to different parties. And so we never try to condemn in this organization capitalism. But that doesn't mean that capitalism doesn't have a lot of work to do. Look at Enron. That was one where it got out of control. And I would say the vast majority of businesses are acting in a way more conscious manner than that. So how do these businesses do a force of good? That's what we really believe, and we're trying to do it improving. That plays out whether it's for employees, where we've been named more than 100 times the best places to work, and their families. We treat our suppliers as a stakeholder better than we are treated by our own customers. We pay them before we're paid. And these are all lessons that we learned while we were in this situation. And I think that creates a lot of camaraderie. It creates a lot of loyalty and dedication to the organization, but it also creates a lot of strength when you go through these times.
What is, just for those who might not be familiar with the term, what is conscious capitalism?
Okay, I already mentioned it. It is an organization, but it's also, let's say, a movement, and it's also a philosophy, and founded by several people, but maybe one of the most recognized names would be John Mackey of Whole Foods. And it's an organization that believes in the good of business, in the good innate potential of capitalism, which has seen us lift entire countries out of poverty over the last 200 years, if you go look at these statistics. And despite some of the flaws that it has, that we need to continue to rely on the good that in the foundation that this provides countries and people of the world. And it has 4 pillars: having a purpose beyond just making profit, being a stakeholder model, not a shareholder model, a commitment to conscious culture, and a commitment to conscious leadership. It is a framework that on those 4 pillars that companies can be built upon. And small plug, there is a CEO conference coming up in October that if you are a CEO and these are things that resonate with you, it is one of the greatest conferences I go to each year. And you will not be disappointed.
Curtis, we're in a position now. It's an election year, obviously, and we're in this unique position in American politics, and I think really in global politics, where call it if you like, the neoliberal consensus, the kind of broad belief in markets' ability to solve problems, is being challenged, and challenged in a way that I don't think it probably has been since the fall of the Soviet Union. Right, for the first time, there is really widespread skepticism about capitalism's ability to solve problems and create human thriving. So, to take it to a really basic level, Curtis, why is capitalism good?
Okay, I mentioned a few of these, but if we actually historically look at some of the facts, if you look at the wealth of nations, which might be and that was 1776, along with the Declaration of Independence. I think it was only a few months before. But you have these 2 things that came together, right? One of the beacons of the world of freedom, the Declaration of Independence, but also the beacon of the world for capitalism. And since that time, if you really look since that time, we've seen inverted curves. If you look at the world extreme poverty levels, and you can regularly go out and check these statistics. you're going to see that more than 90% of the entire world, we had equality back then, and 90% of it was below the extreme poverty line of the entire world. Today, it's less than 10%. I think it's 7%. Don't quote me on that, but you can go and look that up. I think it is 7 or 8% of the world. That's inverted in just 200 years of this world's history. Look at literacy rates. They were around 88 to 90%, I think, at the time, illiterate. So let's say 12% or something, close to that again. And today, another inverted curve. All of these things are rooted in the good that capitalism has provided. I think the average age of a lifespan was 26 and a half years old, and today it's over 70. Wow. These are incredible things that have come with what comes with capitalism, which is competition. There's a good and a downside to that, but creativity and drive and the need for invention and trying to succeed. These are the good things about business. Well, we still have to work, but we have to pay attention to some of the, let's call them complaints, or what I like to refer to as the shadows that have arisen with classic capitalism. And these shadows might be an environmental destruction unnecessarily, right? And I'm not talking about making up statistics, but undeniably things that have happened in the environment, like burning rivers in Ohio and some of the things. The corporate greed or individual greed that led to the collapse of Enron. These are the shadows that we need to address without attacking the foundation.
And when you look at kind of individuals who have an increasing skepticism, you see threads of this in the American right and American left. I think Donald Trump has succeeded largely in tapping into anxieties about jobs going overseas. And you see his proposals for a 10% blanket tariff on all imports, a 60% tariff or more on China. You see on the left, Kamala Harris pointing to corporate greed as the reason for high grocery prices. And you see, a number of policies proposed that would increase government involvement in markets or potentially even eliminate certain markets. And I'm curious, what is it that you think with the kind of average American really makes those arguments resonate? What is it that you think people are seeing at the ground level that are making them more skeptical of the aims of capitalism and more skeptical of markets?
I think that in today's let's call it political arena, you find in the United States, at least in a two-party system, you find both parties playing off of very rudimentary human nature concerns. And that is fear, right? Oh, fear, all the jobs are going to be going overseas. Or other fears like it's going to be out of control, you're not going to be able to live, you're not going to be able to afford. Or envy. Envy is a very dangerous thing as well. I often discuss with my kids is really most of the time when we envy, we are looking up, what I say looking up, looking at the people that might have more than we do or something that we want. And I ask my children to do the opposite, to look down. And in my role and position, it's easy for me to kind of look at maybe people in different economic situations or social situations, but we have a lot to be grateful for. And I think in the U.S. as a whole, if we would instead of focus on fear, and instead of focusing on the things of envy, focus on gratitude and what we do have, and really accomplish at focusing on the challenges that we have together. But that's very difficult in today's political environment. So I think what they're doing is in a race that looks to be really close. I was looking at some statistic today that maybe Harris had 2 more electoral college votes based on the polls than Trump. That's a razor's edge. What are they going to do? They're going to try to get the votes. And the best way to get votes is to instill, I think, fear in people and to potentially create envy to try to get those votes to come in. And it has nothing to do with politics. That has everything to do with human nature. And I think that's what there's a very conscious movement on both sides to do this.
If you were to talk to a working class person, maybe they're working more than one job, struggling to have enough to pay for groceries, right? And they're saying, look, capitalism isn't working for me. Markets aren't working for me. Maybe it is better to, have the state step in and make the playing field more level for me, right? What do you say to someone like that? I suspect that for someone in that situation, having a CEO tell them, well, we need to beware of envy, that might not resonate. So why is it that capitalism, and maybe conscious capitalism, is actually better for someone in that situation?
Yeah, and I do want to give credence to what you just said. It's going to be hard for those things to resonate with somebody maybe talking in my position, white and male, and in a CEO position. I will say, though, that I have very modest beginnings, and this is one of the things that I love about the U.S. in general and where we live, is the fact that there is opportunity. But even with that, if you are struggling for food, and I would encourage that we really draw, when you look at the bigger picture of the world. And that's a very hard thing to do, because by the world standard, the U.S. is very, and how do you get this to be known by people? They don't get to see it. What they see is their bowl is empty, or they just want to have a job, any job, and they can't find one. And what I can attest there about conscious capitalism is the foundation of capitalism is what enables the social good of this world. If we want a governmental program, if we do want it for extended health care benefits, and if we do want it for more welfare type benefits for the people that are in need, that money comes from just one place. The government itself generates very little money itself, except through the taxes of the value that happens between business. And that is why capitalism has succeeded, because it has generated more money for these governmental programs. And there is fear, if you look through history at what's happened. If you look at the attempts to move too far away from this, they have almost all failed. If not all failed. I just don't want to say that. And so it's the careful balance, because these are hard things. When your immediate need is food, how do we give people hope instead of giving them fear? And how do we change the rhetoric? Because the rhetoric right now is one of fear, and it's not one of hope, and how we can help and hope.
One example, I think, that's worth pointing to of what you're saying here, you'll hear, the Nordic countries, you'll hear Sweden, for example, pointed to frequently as an example of a state that's doing very well by its least privileged members. And yet, a country like Sweden ranks tremendously high for economic freedom on almost all metrics, and really has a very free market system with a very progressive kind of tax structure and a tax and spend regime. There are those who look to that as a model. Alternatively, there's a new model that's emerged, a new economic model that's emerged and is being pioneered by some in the US around modern monetary theory, right? And the idea is, hey, we have the world's reserve currency, and we can actually just create more money, right? There's demand for dollars. We can just create more money. We don't have to tax and spend. We can just spend money that's created directly by the Federal Reserve Bank. What are your thoughts on that?
These are really good questions. And the one about Sweden, I'll take first. I believe that they're in a position today because if you look back, if I recall history properly, back in the 70s or 80s, they actually attempted to shift with a significant failure to a more socialistic. So they attempted to go there and it failed in such a short period of time, let's say 10 years, that they had to move away. They realized that they can't attack the foundation, the foundation being the free market, the aspiration being the welfare. And with the foundation, and that's what not scares me, but what I don't want to go too far in the United States. Let's not attack the foundation, but let's make the foundation stronger so that we have more and to do for people that may not have enough. And when I say enough, I really want to talk about enough opportunity to succeed and to fail. And then if we take the modern monetary theory and we can just print, I think we actually have a recent historic event that can kind of allude to what may happen if we take advantage of that too much. During COVID, we effectively shut down work and shut down for an extended period of time, longer maybe in some cities than others, but it was for an extended period of time where the government was more or less printing money, putting money into the economy that was not extracting value between the consumer and supplier. And I think that's one of the simpler reasons, which we don't talk about today, of why inflation is so high and why it's becoming unaffordable. When you insert money into a system where it is not innately adding value, where I'm not providing a good or a service in exchange for something else, good service or money, this inflation, and we just did that for about 18 to 24 months en masse, and you can already see the strain that it is causing inside of our country today. So while I believe it's a reasonable theory on the surface, I think we've had a test ground which showed where it would go if it was in place too long.
Absolutely. I think we can look at M2 money supply, basically since the start of the pandemic. It's an unprecedented rise. It's positively wild to see how it's spiked.
Yet it's not talked about of one of the reasons for inflation. And that's a common reason. There's more money supply.
That's fantastic. I think that's absolutely right. I think we can see M2 money supply has absolutely gone crazy. And we hear, attributions to corporate greed as if corporations just discovered greed in the last 3 or 4 years, right?
No, and I don't think we will ever eliminate greed completely. And you might always have some of these shadows, but that's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm going to say, let's keep the foundation and strengthen it. That foundation being capitalism, that foundation being business. If they are healthier, the businesses are healthier, they generate more jobs. They generate more profit. The more profit the businesses have, the more the government gets to take from that. And in a reasonable taxing environment where the companies can both grow and the government can get money to do, in my opinion, I wish it was a more balanced budget. That's one of my, I wish that happened. I'm not sure either party plays into that, but trying to be fiscally responsible with the resources we do have, and let's get more resources there.
So is that really what conscious capitalism aims to do, to strengthen the base and make capitalism sustainable? And if I'm being, maybe frank here, like also to reduce the need for sort of interference directly from the state?
Yes. And I want to be careful for speaking for conscious capitalism as a whole. Conscious capitalism is a big tent. And we want to welcome classic capitalists. We want to welcome some of the stakeholder capitalists, like people that might be big into ESG and some of these. We welcome everybody that believes business can be a force of good into this tent. And then we want to have the dialogue that how do we make it better? How do we reduce? But we do not want to kick people that believe in the good of business out. That's the big tent that we're trying to include, different ideologies. And free market capitalism is at the base of that, is at the foundation, so that we can do more good in this world.
So how has conscious capitalism impacted the way that you do business, now at Improving? Like what do you do different because of these kind of ideological commitments?
It is pervasive. And in fact, we have internal courses on it. We have a welcome box that we send out the Conscious Capitalism book in it. We give away books along with Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. These are the 2 books we give out. It affects us every single day. If I look at the first one, A Purpose Beyond Just Making Profit, do not confuse. We must have profit or the business ceases to breathe and it dies. So yes, profit is one of the purposes, but what is that purpose beyond just doing that? And we are really trying to reshape our industry. We have an industry purpose, but there are some organizations that have a environmental purpose, some that have social purposes. The key to conscious capitalism is one of freedom of choice, not of coercion. You're not going to see us say, you must do X, Y, Z in this way, or you're not welcome here. No, let's do good. And don't try to be everything to everybody. Try to do a few things with incredible excellence. Stakeholder models versus shareholder models, right? And how do you take a more balanced? Doesn't mean that every stakeholder is equal or equally important, right? That's gonna tread down. But are we giving them a reasonable amount of attention and effort? Our 100 best places to work, the fact that we include families in our activities, we include our suppliers, and we actually treat them better than we are treated. That is straight out of our interpretation and our implementation of conscious capitalism.
So for those who might not be familiar with the terminology here, and you've touched on it, but just to make it really explicit, what is the difference between stakeholder and shareholder as you're defining it here? We have kind of two different focuses, and what does that actually look like?
I'm going to say in what I term classic capitalism, the stakeholder that is given the most significant priority is the shareholder, and we see this in public companies. And then the regulations that go around this that are imposed, not without reason, but now maybe too tightly by government systems, they have to report every 90 days. And the board removes the CEO if just 2 quarters they're down. That's where we put the one shareholder, of which most people that have a 401k are shareholders, at the highest priority. And then the stakeholder model says, yes, that is important, but we must bring attention to and elevate other important stakeholders within this larger ecosystem. And it goes beyond the main 3, which is shareholder, customer, and employee. But what are suppliers? Maybe your community, maybe the environment, maybe a social cause, right? Not every company has to have the exact same stakeholder model. But we do encourage them in conscious capitalism to think beyond the 1 or the 3 and go into the many.
And how do you think about, I guess, if you're a company that already has shareholders and you have been operating on a paradigm of maximizing shareholder value, how do you make this pivot? How do you make the pivot from saying, hey, we're just thinking about maximizing shareholder value, to saying, you know what, we've had an epiphany, we want to make a change? How do you go about making that change?
Well, there are organizations that you've seen done this with Whole Foods and other companies. And if you look at, I think there's a book out there called Firms of Endearment. If you look, that gives some statistics around this. If you look at the long term, say we want to maximize shareholder value in the long term. Because the challenge today is our systems around business, the non-free market aspect of it. When you have a little bit too much regulation, the government itself is saying we're going to maximize on a 90-day basis. Nothing, I can tell you, how long did it take us to get out of Enron, our business? A lot more than 90 days. I would have been let go in a public company in that system instead of getting all those debts paid. Instead of in the public system, I wouldn't have been given the long-term perspective on things. But there's also there are responsibilities like that. The long term is the key. Long-term maximization of profit versus short term, and that might be hard for some people to adjust. I wish there was a longer term market that was supported, maybe report once a year or something like that gives organizations a chance to rectify situations and challenges when they occur.
Thanks for that. I think that's helpful context. So now, kind of coming back to our story from earlier, you had this incredible challenge of Enron having failed. It represents 30% of your business wiped out overnight. You are having late nights, sick to your stomach, having to lay off 40% of your company. You end up, over the course of several years, managing to pay off all of these debts. And it takes time and it takes a lot of frank conversations. You have to bring in everyone you owe money to and say, hey, please don't shut us down. We're going to pay this back, but we're committed, right? But we need your help to make this happen. How ultimately, what ended up happening with that company? How did you emerge? Did you ever kind of hit your stride again, find prosperity again? What happened next?
It was really in the formation of this organization. So we did hit our stride. And if you look back at the time period, we started to reach new highs in quarterly revenue and new highs in our EBITDA or profit back in 2006. But at this time, I think that it had taken a while. This is longer term. And the organization decided that they really wanted to consolidate our UK organization and our US organization under a single, and I was not that person. And so there's a little bit of an irony there. I obviously have a little bit of a shame, but we had taken a business and we had run it very responsibly, actually through the storm, out the other side, and kind of near these peaks, they decided to consolidate. And another lesson, though, that can't be resentful if you're a business owner and you join another company, right? That's part of what may come with the territory of selling your business. Today, we have a private equity partner that I have brought on that has been tremendous. We chose the right. Whatever horror stories you have heard about private equities, it's not true about Trinity Hunt Partners. Every CEO that's in it is saying the same thing. I meet with forums of the portfolio companies. Choose your right private equity company. And if you are very careful with that, these storms, they take a very similar approach. So that's a huge, huge lesson for any business owners.
Are there any other lessons or takeaways that you have for CEOs or entrepreneurs in similar industries, or who might find themselves in similar situations? I don't even think it has to be industry specific, because it's a common enough problem for businesses. They have one big customer that doesn't come through for them, and they end up in a precarious situation. Any advice you want to share?
Each situation's complex, and it's hard to generalize some of that, but we have, we get a particularly large client these days, we may hire temporary employees to assist with us. That way, if ever a large client goes away, we make less money on the temporary employees because we pay them more because they're taking risks. So we share in some of that risk. But if the client goes away, we then don't have to do the same things such as layoffs. And get a group of people there. If you're a CEO or a president and you can do this, organizations like YPO, Young Presidents Organization, I think there are other ones like Vistage, but where you get a group of peers where you can actually be open with, extend trust, and have these advisory boards. These professional organizations are perhaps some of the most impactful groups that I've had in my life.
How do you feel about a lightning round?
All right, lightning round. 1 or 2 words?
Yeah, 1 or 2 words. What do you think is the most important trait a CEO has to have?
Inspiration.
What is your favorite leadership book or business book?
The Speed of Trust, Stephen Covey.
Where outside of business do you look for inspiration?
My YPO group.
What is your favorite business story of all time, if someone wanted to look into the journey of a company?
I really admire the story of Whole Foods.
Is there anything we didn't discuss that we should have?
No, there are a lot of things that we discussed that I didn't realize we would.
All right. Well, thank you for being willing to go there with me. Curtis Hite, thanks so much for coming on Top CEO.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Curtis Hite's story reminds us of a powerful truth. Adversity in business is inevitable, but how we respond defines our future. Curtis faced one of the most challenging moments a CEO can imagine: the sudden collapse of a key client. Through resilience, tough decisions, and a commitment to conscious capitalism, he navigated the storm and emerged stronger. Whether it's restructuring or leading with integrity, this episode shows that even in the darkest times, there are lessons that shape us into better leaders.